Hi everyone, Sanjay here. So in today's video, we're going to be diving into the best way to start every single one of your sales meetings. Now, if you've ever had a sales call where the prospect started getting pissed off because you're asking them a ton of questions, or you lose control of that meeting, this video is definitely for you. Now, before we dive into the video, I do have a weekly newsletter that I release every Saturday with actionable sales tips. Here's a link to sign up. Now, before we talk about the how of what you should do before every sales meeting, let's talk about why you need to do the thing. So there's really three reasons. One, expectation setting. So when you start the meeting in the correct way, you set the expectations of the prospect of what they're going to get out of the meeting. This is extremely important because prospects get angry. Actually, let's take the word prospects out of this. People get angry when their expectations don't match the reality. And so because of that, it's extremely important to make sure they understand why they're taking the meeting, what they're going to get out of the meeting, so the expectations are set and everyone is happy. Second, it allows us the ability and also the privilege for us to start asking questions if we're able to explain why we're asking those questions, right? No one likes to get interrogated, so it's important for us to, set up the expectations for the call so that they understand exactly why we're asking, and it gives us the right to start asking people questions. And ultimately, it allows us to control the conversation. Whoever is asking questions, they're in control of the meeting, they're in control of the conversation. It allows us to qualify deals because we're actually able to ask discovery questions to figure out if this is something that we can actually help with. And it allows us to start, the deal cycle by being in full control of that initial discovery. Now, let's talk about how we do this. So I want you to think about an acronym. This is an acronym that I've been using for basically my entire sales career. It's called TAPO, T-A-P-O. So T stands for time. So you want to make sure that as you start the meeting, that you understand whether or not the prospect, still has time for the meeting, has a hard stop at the end of the meeting. It might sound something like, "Hey, John, does this time still work for you? Hey, John, do you have a hard stop at the 30-minute mark?" If you have a meeting, you could also tell them like, "Hey, I've got a meeting at the 30-minute mark. I've got a meeting at the top of the hour, so I do have a hard stop." The reason we ask for time is there is not a discovery question in the world that you need to ask that supersedes scheduling next steps. Scheduling next steps is the most important part of that initial discovery call. So what you need to do is make sure that you have enough time to recap the conversation, make a recommendation, and then get the next steps on the calendar. So if the prospect does have a hard stop at the 30-minute mark or the 1 hour mark or whatever, you want to make sure that you give yourself 5 to 10 minutes to recap the conversation, make a recommendation on what good next steps look like, and then schedule those next steps. Objections might come up, so you can start doing some objection handling, but you want to make sure that you have enough time to schedule next steps. And that's why you want to ask for the time frame that you have before every meeting. Now, A stands for attendees. Now, attendees, if you're doing a complex sale, whoever you're speaking to is probably not the ultimate person, that's going to make a decision. There's going to be a lot of other people that are going to be influencing the decision or the sale. So you want to make sure that if there is someone else on the team joining, that you give them time. So you understand like who all are you going to be selling to, who all are you going to be speaking with. So it could sound something like, "Hey, John, it'll just be me from the AccuSales end. Who else from company XYZ is going to hop on the call today?" And if it's saying, "Hey, we're waiting for my colleague Jake," you can say something like, "Okay, well, what's Jake's role? How do you and Jake work together?" So you can get a good understanding of the dynamic between everyone in the group, what everyone's role is, how much influence everyone has. All that is super important. And the best way to do that is to make sure you're waiting for the attendees and you understand who else you're waiting for. So that's where the A for attendees comes in. Now, P stands for purpose. Now, the purpose of this conversation that we're having, like why are we actually having a sales meeting, right? This is extremely important because it sets the expectations of, hey, I'm going to ask you questions to understand what challenges and pains you're trying to solve for or what business goals you're trying to achieve, to make a recommendation on whether or not we can partner together, whether or not whatever you buy from me, whatever solution I have will actually help you get to those goals or solve those pains. This is important because the prospect now understands that yes, you're going to be asking them a ton of discovery questions. They will ideally need to answer those questions for you as a seller to make a recommendation. This is extremely important to make sure that we have the right to ask questions, we control the conversation, and the prospect doesn't get angry because we're starting to ask a bunch of discovery questions. And fourth piece, O, stands for outcome. What is the outcome of this sales meeting, right? But why are we actually having this call? It's extremely important for the prospect to know before we start the conversation what they can expect to get out of the conversation. So if it's an initial discovery meeting, you might say something like, "Hey, we're going to discuss a little more about your challenges. Coming out of this conversation, we might schedule a demo, we might schedule a separate discovery meeting, we might schedule a POC. If you're selling something very transactional, you might send them over a contract and just let them, buy the product right then and there. Whatever the next steps look like, you want to make sure the prospect understands, hey, coming out of this meeting, I'm going to either learn something about, a problem, learn something about a solution, or I'm going to be able to schedule next steps to evaluate your product further. So they're looking to you as a seller to make a recommendation. What are they going to get out of the meeting by sitting with you for 30 minutes or whatever? Another important piece for this is also asking the prospect what they would like to see out of the meeting, right? So you could say something like, hey, John, coming out of this call, you'll have a better understanding of how we could potentially partner together and what ideal next steps will look like based on my recommendation on what I hear. But I just want to say, this conversation is not about me. What would you like to get out of our meeting today? Now, this gives you a good way to let the prospect start talking about what's important to them, why they're looking at a solution like you, and it allows you to tailor the conversation so that you're making it, what's important to them. So you can have, you maximize the time, you can maximize your value prop in your message to really drive home the value of your product or solution. So it's a great way to ask them, what they would like to get out of the meeting as well. So how does this sound typically, right? So, let's say a prospect hops on, for me personally, I sell sales services to open source companies. So I might be working with the CEO of a company. So let's say, CEO John hops on. So it might sound something like, hey, John, let's get started. Do you have a hard stop at the 30-minute mark? No? Okay, cool. Perfect. It'll just be me from the AccuSales side. Who else are we waiting on from your company? Okay, no one else? Perfect. So we can get started. Really, the purpose of this conversation, very simple. Want to learn a little more about some of the challenges you're encountering in your go-to-market, some of the gaps in your sales process today. And really coming out of this conversation, I'll make a recommendation on whether or not this is something we can partner on together. And if we do, what that engagement will look like. But I just want to make sure that we're covering everything that's important to you. What would you like to get out of a conversation today? They have short, sweet, simple. And so that is giving me the ability to ask questions, setting expectations of the prospect, and also making sure that I'm in control of the conversation moving forward. And ultimately, if you're able to control the conversation, you're able to control the sale. Awesome, y'all. So that's the video for today. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you like the content on this channel, please subscribe to the YouTube channel. I post videos every week. But outside that, I'll see you in the next video. Have a good rest of your day. Take care.